In this episode, we're going to learn how to write intelligence requirements that feel satisfying to the people who request intelligence and practical to the people who have to produce it. Beginners often assume requirements are just a formal way of asking a question, but in intelligence work, the requirement is the steering wheel. It determines what you collect, how you analyze, and what you deliver. When requirements are vague, everything downstream becomes messy because you collect too much, interpret too loosely, and deliver something that sounds interesting but fails to drive a decision. When requirements are crisp, the whole intelligence cycle becomes faster and calmer because you can filter noise with confidence and you can explain why a particular piece of information matters. Stakeholders love good requirements because good requirements lead to answers they can use, and producers love good requirements because good requirements protect them from endless rework. Writing them well is a skill you can learn, and it is one of the most valuable skills in threat intelligence. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A crisp requirement begins with clarity about who the stakeholder is and what decision they are trying to make, because an intelligence requirement is not a curiosity question. The stakeholder might be a security leader deciding where to invest, a defender deciding what to monitor, or a business owner deciding how to manage risk around a product or partner. If you do not know the decision, you cannot know what counts as a useful answer, and you cannot know what scope is appropriate. Beginners sometimes try to write requirements that sound broad and impressive, but broad requirements often produce generic outputs that do not help anyone act. A stakeholder does not love a requirement because it sounds sophisticated. They love it because it produces clarity that reduces uncertainty and makes a decision easier. This means your first job is to translate the stakeholder's request into a decision-oriented need. Once you can state the decision in plain language, the requirement starts to write itself. The next ingredient is specificity without over-precision, because you want the requirement to be narrow enough to guide action, but not so narrow that it becomes impossible or fragile. Specificity means you define the subject, the time frame, and the context that matters, such as a technology stack, an industry, a region, or a business process. Over-precision means you demand details you cannot reasonably obtain, like asking for a definitive identity attribution when evidence will likely be incomplete. A crisp requirement is realistic about what intelligence can deliver and honest about uncertainty. It also avoids vague verbs like understand or learn without clarifying what that understanding is meant to support. Instead of saying understand threats to our cloud environment, a crisp approach would aim toward a decision such as what threat activity is most likely to affect our current exposure within a defined time frame. That shift from vague to decision-focused is what makes a requirement lovable. Another essential trait is that a crisp requirement is measurable in the sense that you can tell whether you answered it. Beginners often write requirements that cannot be judged, like tell me everything about a threat actor, because you can never fully complete that task. A measurable requirement has a clear finish line, such as identifying the most relevant threat activity for a defined environment, or assessing whether a specific campaign is likely to target a specific type of organization. You might not be able to provide certainty, but you can provide an assessment with a clear scope and confidence statement. Measurability also helps you manage stakeholder expectations, because it prevents a situation where the stakeholder keeps asking for more because the original requirement never defined what enough looks like. When you define what success looks like, you protect your time and you deliver more consistently. Stakeholders tend to love this even if they do not use the word measurable, because it feels like professionalism and clarity. Crisp requirements also use language that matches the stakeholder's level of technical depth, because requirements are a communication tool, not just a technical artifact. If you write a requirement filled with deep technical jargon for a non-technical leader, it may technically be accurate, but it will not feel usable. If you write a requirement that is too high level for an analyst who needs to tune detection, it may feel disconnected and frustrating. A stakeholder loves a requirement when it sounds like it reflects their reality and respects their decision context. This does not mean you hide important detail. It means you choose the detail that matters. A good practice is to include enough context to guide intelligence work while keeping the wording simple and direct. When you can state a requirement in one or two clean sentences without losing meaning, you are close to crisp. A powerful way to write requirements that stakeholders love is to separate what they asked for from what they need, because stakeholders often ask for outputs rather than outcomes. For example, a stakeholder might ask for a report on a specific threat group, but what they really need might be guidance on whether the group is relevant to the organization's industry and technology. Another might ask for a list of indicators, but what they really need might be advice on what activity patterns are most important to watch for and why. Another might ask whether we are under attack, but what they really need might be a prioritized assessment of what evidence suggests, what to verify next, and what actions are warranted at different confidence levels. Your job is to translate the output request into a decision support requirement. This translation is not manipulative. It is how intelligence becomes useful. When stakeholders see that your requirement captures what they actually care about, they trust you more. Crisp requirements also make assumptions explicit because hidden assumptions create conflict later. If a stakeholder assumes the requirement is about the next 30 days and you assume it is about the next year, you can both do great work and still disappoint each other. If a stakeholder assumes the requirement is about external threats and you assume it includes insider risks, you can end up collecting the wrong information. If a stakeholder assumes the requirement is about preventing all risk and you assume it is about reducing the most likely risk, you can end up arguing about what the answer means. A crisp requirement avoids this by including the key assumptions in plain language, such as time horizon, scope of systems, and type of outcome expected. This does not need to be long. It just needs to be clear. When assumptions are explicit, stakeholders feel heard and producers feel protected. Another feature of lovable requirements is that they are prioritized, even when there are multiple needs, because an unprioritized set of requirements creates chaos. Stakeholders often have several questions at once, and beginners might try to write them all as separate requirements without ranking them, which makes it hard to decide where to spend time first. In practice, intelligence resources are limited, and prioritization is part of the value you provide. This can be as simple as identifying what decision is most urgent or what risk is most immediate. Even if you only work one requirement at a time, having a sense of what comes first helps you keep momentum and deliver value quickly. Stakeholders love this because it shows you understand urgency and impact, and it reduces the feeling that intelligence work is random. On the exam, this shows up as questions about what to do next or what is most important, and crisp requirements support those choices. It is also helpful to recognize that intelligence requirements often fail in predictable ways, and learning those failure patterns makes you faster at writing good ones. One failure is being too broad, which creates endless collection and vague conclusions. Another failure is being too narrow, which creates an answer that is technically correct but irrelevant to the real decision. Another failure is focusing on the wrong object, like focusing on a named actor when the real need is understanding a tactic affecting your technology. Another failure is phrasing the requirement as a deliverable rather than a decision need, like produce a brief instead of assess relevance and impact. When you can spot these failure modes, you can fix them quickly by tightening scope, shifting to the right decision, or reframing the object of analysis. This is what makes you able to write requirements fast, because you are not starting from scratch each time. You are applying a few reliable quality checks. A practical mental quality check is to ask whether the requirement answers 4 quiet questions. Who is this for? What decision does it support? What scope defines the work? And what would make the answer useful? If you cannot answer one of those questions, the requirement is likely missing something. If the scope is unclear, you will collect too much or too little. If the decision is unclear, your analysis will drift into description instead of assessment. If usefulness is unclear, your dissemination will become a data dump rather than a clear message. This quality check is especially valuable in an audio-first approach because you can do it mentally in seconds. It also helps you refine stakeholder requests quickly in conversation, even if you never write the requirement down formally. The exam often expects this kind of thinking, where you identify what is missing and what to clarify. Finally, writing requirements that stakeholders love is not about making stakeholders do more work. It is about making the intelligence process respectful of their time. A stakeholder does not want to be interrogated, but they do want to feel that the intelligence they receive is aligned to what they truly care about. That means your refinement questions should be minimal and purposeful, focused on clarifying decision, scope, and time frame. When you can reflect their need back to them in a crisp requirement statement, you create confidence that you will deliver something usable. This confidence is a real-world outcome because intelligence programs thrive on trust and collaboration. If stakeholders trust that you will deliver relevance, they will come to you earlier, share better context, and act on your outputs more reliably. Crisp requirements are the doorway to that relationship. To close, crisp intelligence requirements are lovable because they turn uncertainty into a clear problem statement that can be answered responsibly. They are decision-oriented, specific without being unrealistic, measurable in the sense that you can tell when you have answered, and written in language that fits the stakeholder. They make assumptions explicit, support prioritization, and avoid common failure patterns that create busy work and disappointment. When you practice translating output requests into decision needs, you create requirements that guide collection and analysis toward relevance rather than volume. This skill will help you on the exam because it sharpens your ability to recognize what a scenario is truly asking for and what the next best step should be. More importantly, it will help you in real intelligence work because clear requirements are how intelligence earns trust, reduces waste, and becomes something stakeholders actually use to make better choices.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.